We'll miss those first few minutes of wisdom. Requirements are hard because you're often writing it because you don't know if you can build it. You're not sure what you want to build. You're not sure if what you want to build is what the customer wants. You often have to change in midstream what you're developing. Sometimes you get all the way finished and it turns out nobody wants it. I went to work for a company called LaserGo, and they actually hired me to work on what would eventually become Pages, though they didn't do Pages. But as an interim product, back in the day, this was end of 1989, both WordPerfect and Microsoft Word had macro front ends, and so they were developing a product called GoStyles that was basically a very, very lightweight and dumb version of Pages. Basically, you can say, I want to write a letter with this design style, and it would lay out those styles within Word or WordPerfect, and then you could start to edit the letter. And it was partially done. I took it over. I finished it. I wrote the manual. I think I mentioned this. I literally wrote the ad copy, laid out the ads, photographed them, and sent the ad pictures to the computer magazines we were selling this in. And I'm not sure we ever actually sold a single copy of GoStyles. And this gets to what I like to call the 1% fallacy. This is got this big installed base out there, this big market. If we get just 1% of that market, we'll live like kings and queens. And the truth is, it's perfectly possible to get a product all the way finished, ship it out, and have no one buy it. Or so few people buy it as to be, in effect, the same as having no one buy it. Yes?
So, when a company like this is developing a product like this, they didn't have any buyers or investors that had already said they wanted to?
No, it was a small privately held software company. The founder, their main product was a PostScript interpreter for PCs, so that people who were doing PostScript printing could do PostScript printing back before you'd have drivers as a standard thing, back frankly before Adobe was nearly as dominant as they ultimately became. And this was an idea of something to sell the PostScript driver so that people could do PostScript printing onto regular printers, non-PostScript printers. And it shipped, and like I said, for all I know, we may have sold a few copies, but I mean, considering the fact that we actually finished both GoStyles for Word and GoStyles for WordPerfect and ran ads, I personally, during my remaining time there, which wasn't terribly long, didn't know of any products that actually shipped. The wrong people are often involved in writing them. Managers and salespeople who don't know or understand what's technically feasible in the desired time frame. Sometimes engineers who are more interested in writing what's cool than what will actually sell. And marketers who want the impossible. Customers often don't know what they want until they see something working. How many of you have had the experience of developing software, whether it's in-house or commercial or whatever, and based on what the customers say, whether they're end users in-house or whatever, but they say, this is what we want, and you develop it, and you put it in front of them, and they say, no, that's not what we want. Okay? Oh, hey, remember, anyone have some stories you'd like to tell? Yes?
So I worked for the NTC, and basically our office system and the interpretation department was all built on paper. And so I basically suggested, hey, we can automate this, put this into, say, Excel workbooks, and just basically use OneDrive to manage everything, have it online, that could be great. And my boss really dislikes, anything except for paper. And so he said, you know, go for it. And then I gave them, you know, basically what I had envisioned as the product. And then he turned around and was like, actually, we want to do it all automated, but now we have to do it like this. And so I had to completely rebuild the system, different format, different. I mean, it still isn't in Excel, but it was definitely shocking to have all my work in a certain area just completely go to waste and have to be transitioned in another way.
Ah, yes. Other stories. Anyone else have any horror stories? Yes.
Yeah, we developed something here for the dance department, and they had very specific requirements. They're only going to use this specifically for department-wide adjudications and auditions at the beginning and end of semesters with a whole bunch of students and of these certain conditions. And it took about 2 weeks after we launched for them. Actually, we want to use it in this and this and this and this too, which it wasn't designed for. So
And which, if you told us ahead of time,
we could have built that in.
yeah, we could have built that in, or we would have made decisions that would have accommodated that easier. It's always easier to build. The most expensive requirements are the ones that are missing. The most expensive requirements are the ones you don't hear about until you've delivered. I had this argument a few times with Larry Spellhog at Pages, because Pages was very design oriented. So it's like, you know, things have to fix, they have to do this, they have to do this. And we hadn't quite shipped yet, but we were, you know, getting close to shipping, and Larry came back and said, can we have just freely rotating headlines? And I said, no. He said, well, why not? Other things have them. I said, Larry, if you'd wanted freely rotating headlines, I would have needed to have known that about 1.5 years ago. And the architecture underneath would be quite different. And 2 or 3 times he came back and said, why can't we? Said, Larry, no, we can't trust him. We just can't do this. Yes.
So, given that the most expensive requirements are the ones that are missing, do you think that that's a significant contributor to like why the lean, like minimum viable product kind of approach that they talk about in Accelerate is so effective? Is because you're constantly giving the customer something to give feedback on?
It's the big driver of the lean thing. Now here's the problem, and I'm a big fan of extreme programming, of lean programming, of everything else. But that said, there's this fundamental architectural conundrum. When I did Pages, when I started work on Pages, when it was still just a gleam in Mike and Vic's eyes, the whole idea with Pages was design models. So you lay out a document, and it'd be done in a given design model, which would have coordinating fonts and headlines and objects and so on. And then you could switch to another design model, and it would lay out the whole document professionally according to that new design model. So I was starting early days work on this, and Vic Spindler was a graphic designer producing design models. And he had a couple of sample design models. And I said, Vic, I need a painful design model. I need a design model that's far more radical than the ones that we have, because I need to make sure that I can handle those cases. So he came up with one called April, after a designer named April Greiman. And April had circular headlines with text wrapping around them, and lots of things. Everything else was pretty much rectangular and so on. So April was my nemesis. It really was. But what it did, the first couple design models I was working on were all sort of clustered like this, and April was sort of way over here. And what this forced me to do in developing Pages architecture, I had to make sure the architecture can encompass all of them. And it was probably one of the best things I did in those early days, because I came up with a much broader and more general and more powerful architecture as a result. Whereas if these were the only ones I had, my architecture would have looked like that. And then if we came back and said we want to do April, it's like, well, we can't. It's like, So, this is the advantage of an architecture first or architecture heavy process. The problem with that, of course, is you can get into the famous analysis paralysis. This is, classic conundrum for waterfallish type approaches. The problem with Agile is that, and this is just how I happen to envision it, I tend to envision this as sort of a big 2D plane here that's got solutions of various height on them. The higher the solution, the better the solution. Part of the challenge with Agile is that you start here and you're getting feedback and you find a good solution and you get there and you get stuck on that little maxim. You never move off there. Agile does not encourage you to say, I'm going to leave this and I'm going to go searching for a better, more general solution. And so unless you have careful thought in Agile, you can end up with a suboptimal architecture that is basically addressing just what the end user wants at that particular time for that particular end user. And then when you start to expand the end user environment, you find it doesn't accommodate the others. So I wish I had an easy answer because you have problems with both approaches. And I'll leave it at that. Just be aware of what the challenges and trade-offs are on each approach. We've already talked about general simple requirements explode into a large number of detailed design and implementation requirements. Failure to formally manage requirements leads to massive scope creep. And one of the interesting things from Accelerate is they've said the very lightweight change control works better than a formal change control, which is not what I would have expected, but they have the research to back it up. And by lightweight, we'll talk about that when we get to that chapter. It's sort of like, well, let's just get together for a few minutes and talk about that and say, do we want to change this feature this way? The problem that I see in a lot of failed projects is that, and we're back to the, we're back to here. It's kind of like, well, build us this, and we built them that and said, oh wait, we want to do all this other stuff as well. That's scope creep. And often scope creep happens while you're building the product, so it's kind of like the goalposts keep moving. It's like, okay, we're almost there. Oh wait, here's 5 new features we need you to add. Okay, we're getting there and we've got them all in. Oh wait, here's 10 new features that we need. And by the way, you need to change these 4 features that you already had to do something different. I already told you the story when I was at Translation Sciences Institute, where Dr. Lytle, like once a year, would come back and say, I've rethought junction grammar. And we have to redo the underlying grammar representation, and all of us as programmers were like, no, just let us finish it. So this is a very real issue, and I just talked about the issue of waterfallish versus agile. Now, my first consulting job, after Pages closed in '95, I had written a book called, 2 books actually, one called Pitfalls of Object-Oriented Development, and the other one called The Art of Where, both based on my 5 years of experience there. And I was looking for work, and there was a company up in I was in San Diego, a company up in Newport Beach, Orange County. ARIC, Aeronautical Radio Incorporated, they were doing the network management system for the Iridium satellite phone project. And I sent them my resume, the VP went out and bought, and they, by the way, they were in the process of shifting from C to C++, and they had no object-oriented experience in their development group. And it just had a disastrous design review with Motorola. And the VP went out and and bought a copy of my book, and it's pre-Amazon, so you had to actually go out to the technical bookstore to buy it. And said, oh my gosh, these are all the mistakes we're making. So they hired me on a consulting basis, but at the same time, they were behind. Now the Iridium project was spread out among about a dozen different firms, maybe more. Motorola was the chief contractor, ARINC was one of the subcontractors, there were others. And ARINC was way behind, and besides the object-oriented stuff, they were just behind in general development. This, I don't know if I already told you this. One of the first things I asked when I got there, of course, I asked, who's the chief architect? And I asked this of the whole development team, which is about 30 people. I got 7 different answers. And I think the number one answer was no one. So that told me a lot there. Then I asked to see the architecture, what there were 4 major subsystems, and there were design diagrams for the 4 major subsystems. But you know what? The connections here didn't work. These would show outgoing and incoming connections, and they didn't match up. And one of the things I ended up doing was actually developing an architecture for the whole system, and then reworking each of the designs so they all fit into the architecture and actually correctly talk to each other. But at the same time, Motorola sent Bob Millar in to basically oversee their project management stuff. And very first meeting, literally my first day there was Bob Millar's first day visiting there. He came there once a week from Phoenix. And he looked at all the ARINC executives and managers there and said, okay, where are the requirements? And they all sort of looked at each other. And he said, where are your baseline documents? Where's the stuff that says what you're building? And they said, well, we've got a few things here and there. And he looked at them and said, if you don't know what you're building, how will you know when you're done? And basically, he said, I'm going to be back here every week. And he says, I'm not going to be happy until you have a box sitting on this conference room table that says, this is what we're building. It has requirements. And to ARINC's credit, within 4 weeks they had it there. And to Bob Millar's credit, I started working for them probably, I want to say, in August. The next build deadline across the Iridium project was October 31st. We were the only group to actually deliver on time. And I credit that to Bob Millar and his just keeping their feet to the fire. I would suggest you watch Dr. Knutson's podcast on software requirements. It's important to find what you're not building, as well as what you are. At Pages, we're a startup, we're trying to get venture funding. We get venture funding. It takes us a year and a half. Get several $1 million in venture funding. We hire Larry Spellhog as our permanent CEO. And one of the first things Larry asks us to do is create a spreadsheet of all the features that can be found in any word processor or desktop publishing system. And I forget who we tasked to do that. I think it was probably our marketing department. They came up with 600 some odd features. And then we sat down as a senior team and marked every one of those features with 3 designations. One was, we want this feature in 1.0 Pages. One was, we want this feature in Pages eventually, but not in 1.0. And one was, we're never going to do this. Rotating headlines were in there, by the way. Because never going to do it. Jerry kept coming back and asking for that. So, it's useful in doing your own requirements document to specify what you're not doing. Just in general terms. We're not going to do this, we're not going to try this, we're not going to try this. That helps for 2 reasons. It communicates it among the team, and it keeps reminding you. When you get tempted and say, if we put this in, we could add this feature. It's like, no, let's not do that. Let's focus on getting our first demo done. Do your requirements, next two items, do your requirements specifically in terms of what you want to demonstrate. First on November 18th and second on December 9th. And I want you to do the same thing. We're going to talk a week from now about doing schedule. It's going to be the same thing. Focus on what you want to demonstrate. Output determines the rest of your program. What you actually put up on the screen, what it actually communicates, whether it's producing data, whether it's showing data, whatever it is, that determines the processing that goes in, and that determines whatever data has to come into it. You should be revising this document constantly. I'm not looking, this is a one semester project. I'm not looking for a big formal document. I mean, if you want to, knock yourselves out. But I'd look at the wikis for prior semesters and look at some of the requirements documents there. And remember, error, theft, copulation, feel free to steal formats and approaches from other semesters' projects. Say, oh, I like how they laid out the requirements here. That's what we're going to do. So that's your task for this week, is get your requirements document. By the way, those of you who are posting stuff, a few of you posted just brand new plain wiki pages, which now shows up in the wiki pages stuff. You need to make sure you do. If you're doing any of your deliverables as wiki pages, make sure they are sub-pages to your project page. So that they don't just show up, because if you now look at the main wiki page, you will see references to, say, status reports, and of course you don't know whose it is, and everyone's clicking there. So, but it's actually, it's usually easier to put them off somewhere else in Google Docs or something and just link to them. Okay, what you have to do by midnight on Saturday, see, I told you we'd get out of here soon, is your team's requirements document. It should be visible via your wiki page. Next week, I will probably bring each of the requirements documents up just so you can see on different approaches. We won't spend a lot of time, but we'll spend time. Your next status report, and you should watch and mark off another podcast. This is a good time to watch the software requirements podcast. It's heavy reading this week. It was pretty light this week. It's pretty heavy this week, and because of that, you can count any of your reading time as billable hours, reported as billable hours for your status report. Because you're probably still not anywhere close to programming. I assume you're going to meet as teams, you're going to discuss requirements, what you want to build. So, those are the reading assignments for next week. And then next week we're going to talk about project estimation and schedule. What you're going to produce next week are PERT and Gantt charts. So the readings are going to be focused a lot on scheduling and problems with scheduling. Any questions? No? Okay, we're done. See you in a week.